What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my solo role-playing and wargaming channel. I'm the Lonely Dungeoneer, and this is the first session of Let's Play Chainmail Solo. In this campaign, I'm using original Dungeons & Dragons with Chainmail Combat as my role-playing system. To play solo, I'm going to be using, as always, the Mythic Game Master Emulator. This is the solo role-playing system. I'm going to be playing with a number of advanced variations and options in addition to the core Mythic Game Master Emulator rules and book, and I will make reference to and try my best to explain any add-ons or extra rules as we go. And finally, I'm going to overlay the campaign with two supplements. We're going to be using Scarlet Heroes. This is a book that allows one player character to roughly simulate the power of an entire party. So this will allow us to achieve balance with one player character in a game designed for large parties of player characters. This actually still might not completely tip the odds in our favor, but this will significantly help to turn the tides in favor of our player character. However, because of how dangerous this world is, and just to keep things interesting, I'm also planning to make use of a second book. This is Hack and Slash, and this is a death and dismemberment book. So if even with Scarlet Heroes there to protect us and to keep our player characters safe, before actually reaching death, our player character will have to suffer through the death and dismemberment table, which will eventually lead to death, but it'll just prolong the agony or the suffering in a way that's interesting for role playing. And this is not to say that the plan is for this character to be immortal by any stretch of the imagination. It's not even really meant to take all of the danger away from the situation. Original D&D is, in its nature, a highly lethal and dangerous game. And so what this really is going to do is it's going to allow me to play as one player character. I won't have the extra task, if you will, of running an entire party of player characters. I can kind of compress that into one player character and think through things from that character's perspective, which at least in the beginning of a campaign is much easier for me to do. So yeah, we'll see how this all plays out. Before creating a character, I actually want to do a little bit of random setting generation. And I'm feeling vaguely inspired to play in a campaign that's high fantasy or even dark fantasy. I think that would go well with Scarlet Heroes. This is going to give us as it says here, a kind of sword and sorcery type of player character. So I think any kind of highly fantastic setting will work well with original Dungeons and Dragons and Scarlet Heroes. So I'm going to, rather than defining this myself in advance, I'm going to use a recent Mythic Magazine article. This is volume 38 of Mythic Magazine, link in the video description if you'd like, with an article called The Solo Setting and World Creation System. And I recently used this article for the first time in one of my offline solo campaigns, and I love how it gave the first adventure in that campaign a feeling of weight or momentum. The setting had a sort of history to go along with it before the campaign ever began, and it felt a lot like when you read an adventure module's background and you kind of get a sense of what the setting is about. It didn't really railroad my first adventure or even really determine what my first adventure was, but it gave the setting some plausibility and in context that helped to kind of solidify the setting in my mind before I ever began. And I'm fairly used to just jumping into a new world with no context. I'm super comfortable with rolling up a character, maybe rolling for a pair of action words to decide a random event that my character is doing right this second, and then just asking the oracle questions as I go, building up the setting from absolutely nothing. Oftentimes that's how I play. But I actually really liked this, so I'm going to try this out. In this campaign, we're going to spend a little bit of time randomly generating a setting for the campaign right now using this article. And I thought about calling this episode Session 0, seeing as we're really creating the backdrop for our campaign and maybe creating our player character. We're not getting into the action with the player character quite yet. But, when you're solo role-playing, a lot of time there's less of a distinction between preparation and actual play. So we're calling this Session 1. This preparation is, I'm going to consider it play. So this is Episode 1. We are randomly generating a fantasy setting. And as far as my player character goes, I recently watched the latest Star Wars trilogy with my wife, and I'm feeling nostalgic about the episode 1, 2, 3 trilogy, thinking about the kind of like Jedi Master and Apprentice relationship, and I thought it might be fun to try to build a character that's like an apprentice to some master at a strange martial combat, some esoteric fighting system. Maybe there's a spiritual element to it, and that could maybe explain why our character is slightly more powerful, right? Scarlet Heroes is going to kind of increase our damage output and reduce the amount of damage that we take to increase survivability. I thought maybe having this kind of Padawan-esque character could play into that pretty well. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But why don't we get started right now with the solo setting and world creation system. So I'm going to jump to the collected tables. And the first thing that we're going to roll for is an adventure genre. And I thought this was interesting because if you read the article, it talks about how you might not even know what role-playing system that you want to play. And I thought that was crazy cool to take that far of a step back. Like, let's say that you want to play, you want to get into some solo role-playing today, and you don't even have a system in mind. You've got a bookshelf full of books that maybe you rotate through effectively. Maybe you have a bunch that you haven't got to, like me. You can use the adventure genre table to help you decide the genre of, well, I mean, I guess it's obvious it's in the title, the genre of your adventure, and that could help you to select a role-playing system, which I think is really cool. Now, me, usually when I'm playing, I like to use the role-playing system as the thing that I'm checking out. Like, Mythic is usually my control variable when I think about my solo play. I basically always am using Mythic, whether it's the one-page Mythic book or even the older red book. I actually have Mythic Role Playing, the original, right next to me in my physical copy. So stoked for Mythic Role Playing 2nd edition to come out. Or most commonly now I'm using the Mythic Game Master Emulator 2nd edition for every campaign. And the thing that I change is the role-playing system. So each campaign is kind of tied to a role-playing game. So when I'm approaching this table, rather than treating it like, rather than using it to select a role-playing system, I'm rather going to allow this to give context to what our campaign setting might be like. Just kind of similar to the next table, which is Adventure Tone. And the way that the book describes this is that our adventure genre is selecting the genre, and Adventure Tone is telling you how that genre feels. So in our case, we can still use the adventure genre table. We'll just have the preconceived context that we're playing original Dungeons and Dragons, and this is some kind of fantasy setting. So for instance, if we rolled for robots, 69 would be robots, then maybe we have like dwarven steampunk kind of machinations, almost like a dwarves Dwemer in the Elder Scrolls, right? So whatever we roll, we can use our context and our creativity to apply it to our setting in some interesting way. All right, so I've got my notes up. I'm ready to go. Let's start by rolling for an adventure genre. Okay, I'm going to roll 2d10. The red d10 is always my tens place. The teal is my ones place. All right. For our first roll, we get a 10. That is communities. Okay. And the second roll, we get 97 Western. So immediately I'm imagining that this campaign setting consists of Western communities. We have frontier, hard-working type communities, maybe mining towns, industrial cities, towns, villages, on the edge of civilization. That's so interesting. This campaign might have something to do with like industrial tycoons, hypercapitalism, hardworking individuals under oppressive systems, or business owners trying to make a living in a hard frontier. Wow, this is actually a really cool start. This is Western communities. That's not where I expected this to go. Okay, why don't we roll for an adventure tone next to add to the flavor, add to the feeling. Our first roll, we get is that a 96? That is vengeance. Ooh. 94, travel for vengeance. This is 100% like bounty hunters, implying outlaws, criminal gangs like Western posses in the frontier. Oh my gosh. Wow, this is so much context, and I think this might fit well with my idea of the pair of characters. I imagine like a Jedi, right, is kind of like a guardian or a peacekeeper. So perhaps that is the role that our player character will play in this rough frontier world. This honestly, I mean, quite obviously I can make the reference to Deadlands, but what this really is making me think of is actually Hostel, the Hostel role-playing game, kind of based on the Cepheus sci-fi engine. That world is like a hard industrial setting, right? But it's themed for space, and that's really like a Western. It's like a Western, but in space, and this is like a Western, but in fantasy. Okay, cool. This is going great. Okay, so now I have to show you the world creation sheet, and this might look crazy, but it's actually really freaking cool. So we have, let's see, we have the name of our world that we're going to come up with. We have a genre and a tone that we just rolled for. Context rules are like things that we want to guarantee are in our adventure. And so as an example, one context rule that we have for the setting is that it's some kind of fantasy setting, as implied by the original Dungeons & Dragons role-playing system, right? So that would be a context rule. No matter what, we're in a fantasy universe. And if we come up with any more, then I'll note them. But the most interesting piece of this page is the World History Paths sheet. And if you head over to wordmillgames.com/resources, Wordmill Games is the publisher of Everything Mythic. If you scroll down, you'll see this world creation sheet, form fillable, from Mythic Magazine 38. I'll open this up. Okay, so now we have a form fillable version of this. So I can kind of show you what we're doing with the world history paths as we go. But essentially what we're going to do with this chart is, given all of the context that we just built about our roughneck Western fantasy setting, we're going to create world history plot lines. Okay, so I'll demonstrate how this works right now by using the chart. So we're going to pick whichever box we want to start out in. I'm going to just kind of arbitrarily choose this box. I'm going to mark it as a start. And what we want to do is roll for something that happened in the history of our universe. I'm going to head over to Mythic GME 2E, and I'll put these right next to each other to make this a little easier. There we go. I'm going to jump down to the collected tables. We're going to go to the action meaning table. Okay, we're going to roll for a pair of action words and interpret them into some event that happened in our settings past. All right, so rolling for the first word, we get 86. That is struggle. 56. Struggle mundane. The word mundane here makes me think of like commoners in these towns in the frontier. So I'm going to interpret this as this history path beginning with settlements forming in this frontier region, perhaps for the perceived economic opportunity. Right? They're looking for gold. They're looking for ore in the earth. So they're striking out into this region to form these towns, but that the common people, the working people, have to work really hard to survive in what is actually a tough region. Okay, so now that we have this box filled, the next thing we need to do is to roll for a direction for this history path to move in. You can see these 4 black kind of dots with numbers, right? So we're going to roll a 1d10 to determine which direction our history path moves in, and this will matter as we go along. For now, we'll just roll a 5, so we're going to move to the right. Okay, so we're moving into this box. We're going to roll for another action word pair. The first word, we get a 22. That is conceal. Interesting. Conceal 000100. Conceal wound. And the implication here is that this second event follows the first event. So this is a sequence of events that we're building. So this new word pair gives us context for something that happened after the settlers moved into this frontier region. So the way that I'm going to interpret conceal wound is that our frontiersmen, they're being wounded by the environment is kind of how I'm taking this. It's really dangerous. Not everyone is surviving, but despite their losses, the settlements are carrying on. There are people, kind of survival of the fittest, that are making their way through, that are surviving, and these people are becoming prideful. So despite the continued dangers, right, that are present in this region, because these settlements are surviving, their people, maybe they feel justified in their hard work, in the fruits of their labor. So I'm imagining that over time, this region, what this world history event means to me is that these settlements become hard and tough and calloused with time. And the people that live there, not only are they hardworking, but they're hard people and prideful people. And maybe you couldn't convince them to leave if you wanted to, despite the danger that they face every day just by living where they live. Okay, this is shaping up rather nicely. Let's roll another 1d10 to get a new direction. We're going to pick a direction around this box now to travel. We'll roll, and we get a 6, so we're going to head down into this box. We'll now roll for another action word pair. For the first word, we get, for our new event, 63. That is neglect. 42, neglect idea. Neglect of ideas. This could be education. Maybe we double down on this group of people. And I say that generically. It's not like this is one town. This is the entire setting that we're in, some large area. These peoples in general, maybe they stop teaching their children about what life was like before, so that maybe these generational groups of people are really, really very deeply entrenched in frontier life, to the neglect of a knowledge and understanding of other parts of the world and maybe even where they came from. So I'll write that our frontier families are neglecting education outside of what's immediately practical for them right now in their communities as far as their work goes, and also what's traditional for them as frontiersmen. I'm sure that there's a culture and a kind of tradition of frontier life that has built up over time, and so this tradition is getting passed along, but maybe not any of the traditions or cultural ideas of that represent where they came from before these populations moved to this area. Wow, these are really very close-knit communities, very entrenched, that are probably not very welcoming to outsiders. It might be difficult as far as social interaction goes to gain the trust of people in these areas. There actually might be a heavy political system, like the way that they all interact with each other and know each other very closely. There might be a lot of implications there. Wow, look at all this context that we're getting. Just, a few word pairs, and we're already deep into understanding the background of a setting that, to me, sounds really cool and exciting because I'm the one interpreting things, so I'm able to kind of interpret it the way that I think would be cool and fun. So this system is really cool. I definitely recommend it as some solo campaign prep. I don't know how well this would go over if you're using a published module. Probably not. It might be interesting to try, but especially if you just want to come to the table as if you had an adventure module, but with that one ready to go. This is pretty cool. Okay, let's roll another 1d10. We're going to determine which way we travel. Notice that we only have 3 boxes, but it covers the full span of values from 1 to 10. We're going to roll. And we get a 1, so it's finally happening. This would move us back up into the prior event. And so what this signals, whenever your world history path runs back into itself, you end the path. So this is the end of this path. That doesn't mean that there's no more events. We're still going to generate more. But this particular thread of frontiersmen moving into this area, this particular path is complete. So this is kind of the state of the world as we approach it in our campaign. And you'll see how this plays out. Now, interesting, I can click on these. So I'm not having the best of luck with clicking on the lines in between these form fillable boxes. But essentially, as soon as you complete a world path, you draw kind of like a shape around it to indicate that this was one path with a given start and ending. And the next step is to start another history path somewhere else. And something special will happen if another history path runs into this one. So I guess I'll start over in this top right corner. We're gonna create an entirely new history path, and we're gonna kick it off by rolling for a pair of action words to describe some other event that happened somewhere in our campaign settings past. So for the first word, we're gonna roll a 97. That is trust, and 18. Trust, danger. This word pair makes me think that settlers are putting trust in someone or something to protect them from danger. So I'm going to make this world event, this world history event, that the settlers begin placing trust in gangs of hardened adventurers known as crews for their protection. And I'm not exactly sure how that plays out, but we can continue this world path to see where it goes from here. I'm going to roll a 1d10 to see whether we're going to step to the left or step down with the next event. With a 3, we're going to step to the left, and we need a new word pair, an action word pair. what happened next. For our first word, we get 46, free, 40, free home. Maybe there was some kind of larger rising danger or threat to the region, and maybe the settlers throughout this setting had to turn to these crews for their collective defense against this larger rising threat. And I think that I'd actually like more information about the threat. I'm going to jump over to Mythic Game Master Emulator, 2nd edition. I'm going to roll for a pair of description words to describe whatever it was that threatened the region in some kind of organized or severe way. Let's roll for a pair of words. First, we get 10. That is something calmly. Okay. 49. Calmly juvenile. Okay, so this might be a kind of funny way to interpret this, but juvenile to me kind of implies small, right? And so if this is a calmly small threat, I'm almost leaning, this is original Dungeons and Dragons, right? I'm almost leaning towards some collective like goblinoid, goblin or kobold threat rising up to threaten these communities. And I'm thinking the word juvenile makes me think the smallest, and in calmly, that almost certainly, to me anyway, implies kobolds, who I always envision as being calculated and cunning or cerebral in comparison to their true goblin cousins. So maybe this was an uprising of kobolds, and there was some larger conflict between organized kobolds and settlement cities, and the cities had to depend on these crews of adventurers for their defense. And that's actually pretty cool. We don't know where this history path is going to go. This might have happened in the distant past. This might have happened in the recent past. If we actually had this kind of Western-esque setting filled with organized bands of kobolds, that could be pretty cool. So kobolds are one of the weakest, physically weakest kinds of creatures to combat with in Chainmail in original D&D. They only have 1/2 of a hit die, and if you're just looking at the bestiary that's included with Chainmail and original D&D, so in the second book, Monsters and Treasure, if you look in that book, there are only 2 creatures that have 1/2 of a hit die, and they are the skeleton and the kobold. However, if you've ever read of or heard of Tucker's Kobolds, you might know that kobolds aren't really a group to be messed with lightly. So this would actually be pretty interesting. Our player character, let's say if they were just surrounded by kobolds and had to go into combat, because we're playing Scarlet Heroes and our player character is going to be scaled up to the power level of a party of roughly 4, we should actually be able to hold our own fairly well against that group of kobolds. If it came down to raw strength, it would be a fair fight. Pretty fair. However, kobolds are indeed cunning, conniving, crafty. So this actually would be quite a bit of fun if little kobold ingenuity, traps, war machines were spread across whatever this frontier region looks like. And I think it might be helpful for me if we could better visualize what this world looks like. I'm now turning to ideas from another Mythic Magazine article. This is volume 33, which should be included in the next Mythic Magazine compilation. When compilation number 6 drops, this magazine should be included in that batch. But for now, you can get this in volume 33 of Mythic Magazine, open world sandbox solo play, where the author discusses how to use Mythic's strengths to build a sandbox campaign setting ahead of a campaign. And it's really cool. I'm going to use some of its ideas to fill our sandbox with sand, as the article describes. And one way I'm going to do this, just to get a little more information about our game world, is I'm going to roll on the terrain descriptors table. And this, rather than giving us a common terrain across our entire world, what I'm specifically asking about is what kind of terrain is this particular wilderness that we're imagining, this frontier region. And maybe there are many of these in the world. Maybe the genre being communities in Western, maybe that implies that these frontier regions exist in different capacities, but I imagine that at the very least in our world history path, this Cobalt uprising would have occurred in one particular frontier region or a group of related regions. That's my assumption anyway, thinking back, thinking through the world history path. So I'm going to roll for a pair of words on the terrain descriptors table. We're going to use that to describe the particular region, frontier region, that we're discussing right now in the Cobalt uprising and adventure crew world history path. Okay, the first word we get that's 69. That is primitive. Interesting. A primitive terrain. And 33, primitive environment. And primitive environment could mean a lot of different things. Let's see, what immediately springs to mind? Maybe like ancient Sumerian. That makes me think of cracked plains or even hills with a river. Maybe even if you imagine Ice Age caveman kind of era. Perhaps this is a hilly region, right? Maybe there are small scatterings of mountains where there are ore or resources. This actually has me thinking of the Roman Britain era in Great Britain, where we have maybe larger plains where the more civilized cities are located. And then you have the highlands that's really hilly. It's much more difficult to spread agriculture out as far with mountains and hills, like in the Scottish Highlands. And the people that live in this kind of highland northern region, not necessarily northern in our campaign world, but in the example of Roman Britain, that kind of wilder place, that is where these frontier settlements are located. So we're going to go with a Scottish Highlands vibe here. Hilly places. There are mountain ranges, but there are also a ton of hills and valleys. And there are towns, there are settlements. Maybe they're spread pretty far apart. Maybe the roads between these settlements are dangerous, very, very long. Maybe it takes a long time to get from place to place. And if you travel far enough, you'll exit the highland region and maybe enter into a longer plains kind of area where there are maybe more metropolis style cities. Okay, so this at least gives me a good mental picture of what this region could look like. I'm thinking kind of Highlander, right? So next, we need to generate the next event in this world history path. I'm going to roll a d10 to see which direction we're going to take this in. We roll a 5, and that is back to the starting point. So no collision with another world path quite yet. This history path is at an end, and so that implies that perhaps this conflict is actually still ongoing. That's super interesting. So there very well could be large groups of kobolds in the world as our campaign begins, maybe hindering passage through key areas. And it seems to make sense if we live in a largely hilly, highland, mountainous region, that there would be plenty of opportunity for goblinoid dens in caves and caverns. That might be a theme in this campaign, at least in the starting region, assuming that we begin our campaign in this region. Okay, now when you're building a world history path, this is already interesting. So we have this idea of settlements forming in a difficult frontier region, and these prideful, entrenched settlements forming cultures of pride in living in this dangerous area, along with a kobold uprising and the dependence on crews of adventurers for protection. This is maybe in lieu of large armies or even militia. Perhaps, I'm sure that there are militia, but maybe these crews actually go out and clear out threats that are closer to home. There's a lot of context here, and when you're building a world history path, you stop when you're ready to stop. You don't actually have to fill out the entire chart. It's not intended to be just completely filled out, but you can continue creating history paths for as long as you'd like. And so in my case, I think I'm going to keep going. There's plenty of room here. I'd like to maybe add some more nuance. Now, something that I didn't mention, for the first world history path, we picked a random spot and then we rolled a word pair and we built up our path. For the second path, we also did the same thing. I picked a box and then I rolled the word pair and started building from there. The article actually suggests, rather than for your second path, your third path, all of your follow-on paths after the first one, rather than picking the box first and then rolling your pair, it actually suggests rolling for the word pair and then, based on your interpretation, placing that in an interesting spot where it might collide with a related path. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to roll for a new word pair on the action meaning table to kick off a brand new world history path, and then we'll place that event in a box on the world history path chart. Okay, rolling for two action words. The first word we get 34, dispute. Dispute 55, misfortune. So this makes me think that our settlements in the region are experiencing some kind of misfortune. I don't want to call this the Cobalt uprising. I'd like for it to be a separate misfortune. At some point in our past, the past of the setting, something bad happened, and the different settlements disagreed on either the cause of it or how to handle it. And I'm thinking that maybe some vital resource like water. Yeah, maybe the water that flows through the highland regions. I'm imagining that perhaps there are ice caps, snowy areas that melt and send water down along the mountains. Some water source is receding, and maybe it's affecting different parts of this region are now experiencing a reduction in water. Maybe if the water continues receding, they'll really be in trouble. And maybe the different settlements disagree on why this is happening. Maybe they even think that there's some religious reason behind why their water sources are drying up and going low. I'll place our new event in this box to give us maybe a higher chance of colliding somewhere over here. I think it'd be cool to have at least one intersection between history paths before we finish kind of crafting our world history. Okay, so let's now roll a d10 to see what direction this event is going to travel, this history path is going to travel. We get an 8. That is going to take us to the left, so we need a word pair, an action word pair, to describe the next event after the water levels begin to recede around the region and some level of panic begins to occur. Our first word we get in 82. This is separate. 78. Separate project. Separate project. Ooh. Maybe, just maybe, there were these engineering projects, which maybe goes against, this might go against another world event, where we said that frontier families neglect education outside of what's practical and traditional. Maybe this was practical for them. It's possible that we have some level of mechanical style engineering happening on a larger scale. Kind of similar to, once again, if we think about Roman Britain, they had some pretty large engineering projects at that time. What if there were settlements that built large dams and reservoirs around their communities, trying to stockpile water for themselves, but at the direct expense of anyone further down the line? And this makes me think of like ancient squabbles over the Nile in Egypt and things like that, or in ancient Sumer with a given city-state controlling a part of the Euphrates, and maybe controlling trade by having control of the waterway. So in a similar manner to some events that actually happened in history, we have these maybe larger frontier settlements that are preventing settlements down the way from getting even this reduced level of water, and that's obviously going to cause a massive conflict. Okay, and now we have one chance to close the history path here. We have one chance to collide with the Cobalt uprising, one chance to collide with frontiersmen becoming prideful despite the continued dangers, and one chance to branch off in a new direction. Interesting. Who knows where this history path is going to go? Not I. I'll roll a 1d10 to find out. And we get an 8 again. Okay, so we have a collision. This history path is going to collide with this event. Frontiersmen overcome suffering and become prideful despite the continued dangers. So now what happens is we close this world history path, but now we have an intersection where something about this event and this event affected or related to one another. There's an intersection between the two, and we need to now define that. And we could possibly interpret this as meaning that these communities at the wrong end of the stick here, this event of them losing even more access to water may have actually been what pushed certain settlements to overcome the suffering and become prideful despite the dangers, right? That kind of makes sense in that maybe the upstream settlements are larger and kind of better off, and maybe they're a little more open, progressive, diverse. Maybe the settlements downstream hardened out of necessity, and maybe even if this world event about settlers in general having this prideful kind of personality or culture, maybe even if that is true across the board, I think I'm going to interpret this as meaning that the communities downstream are particularly entrenched in their ways. They're particularly of a survival mindset of this is my home and I'm not leaving whatever the cost kind of mentality. Wow. That's a pretty cool intersection, and I'm actually excited for more. I'd like to get something completely different. Let's start a new world history path. I'm going to roll on the action table for a pair of words. We get 03, activate, 59, activate news, or maybe news of an activation. Ooh, let's add a mystery element to this. There's something strange happening to the north beyond the settlements, beyond the kobolds, at least whom the settlers are aware of. That's a threat that they can understand. Maybe there are rumors of something even more sinister and strange that lurks behind the frozen northernmost peaks. And I'm so placing that in this box just in case it ends up colliding with the water supply path. That would be a really cool intersection. But we don't know. We don't know if that's the case. So let's now roll a 1d10 and see which direction this path moves in. We get a 4. It does move up and collide with the box above it. So we have rumors of some sinister evil behind the northern peaks, intersecting with water levels recede, supply begins to dwindle, and settlements disagree about the cause and its solution. And I think this intersection is pretty straightforward to interpret. I think that these communities, when they start hearing these rumors of some evil occurring behind the northern peaks, maybe there are reports back from people that have traveled out beyond the wilderness, as far as, maybe humans, elves, dwarves have been willing to go. Maybe in the reports back of something evil stirring, the settlers of the region are attributing this evil to the cause of the water levels receding. And this is pretty cool. Wow, we already have kind of like a huge, larger, really a pair of larger threats to the area. And these are rumors of some sinister evil. It could have nothing to do with that at all. That's just what the settlers think is happening, but there might be some evidence of this. Whatever the case, I think that this is a fairly good example of a world history path. We could add more, but I think there's more than enough context for us to roll with. And so, the last thing that we really need here is a name for our setting, a world name. And in this case, I feel like there is some larger world out there, like we maybe have honed in on one area within a wider world. So this name is going to reflect the area that we've been discussing in the world history path. And I've been thinking about this a little bit, and we've essentially created a highland setting, a highland frontier setting with a western vibe. And there's a really old, you could call a highland setting moorlands. There would be mountains and then moorlands in like the Scottish and British Isles, right? So that ties in nicely with a really old school original D&D campaign called Blackmoor that you may have heard of. One of the original authors of Dungeons & Dragons, Dave Arneson, hosted a Blackmoor campaign for decades. So having something with more in the title seems like it would be cool. I think so. Blackmoor obviously is taken. Greymoor is taken. That's in the Elder Scrolls. So I was thinking maybe Westmoor. That also kind of just invokes like West March campaign style. And it's a Western sort of game genre, right? So yeah, I'm thinking that a good name for this overall region might be Westmoor. And we'll call that a campaign setting for Chainmail, which feels rather fitting, especially given the Cobalt uprising, because we may get into some mass combat. And that's actually what Chainmail was originally used for. Chainmail is a war game, so that could be pretty cool. But I think this is a good stopping point for the session. In today's session, we were able to randomly generate a campaign setting using the solo setting and world creation system from Mythic Magazine 38. And not only was it a blast, I think it's done a really good job in setting up our campaign for success, giving our world momentum is the way that I like to describe it. And in the next session, I want to continue filling in our sandbox with sand using more ideas from Mythic Magazine 33, the article on open world sandbox solo play. I want to learn a little more about the setting, but I would like to build a starting maybe city or settlement that we can assume our player character either lives in or is currently passing through. And I think that this background knowledge on one settlement will give our campaign even more weight as we head into the character creation process, because then we'll be able to visualize a place for our character to actually initially exist. I'd like for the world to already feel like it's living and breathing as we step into it. Maybe even in true sandbox fashion, kicking off our campaign with just in the middle of a day in the life of our player character. And with all of the context that the settlement we're going to generate, all of the context that is going to give, and all of the context that we just generated by going through and creating Westmoor's world history path, all of that context is going to come together and give us a full sandbox, a sandbox full of sand to play in. And we should have absolutely no problem discovering adventure. If you enjoyed today's session, don't forget to hit that like button and to subscribe for more solo role-playing content. And if that's not enough, you'll find even more solo role-playing actual plays in written format on my blog at lonelydungeoneer.blog. Thanks again for watching. I'm the Lonely Dungeoneer, and this has been Session 1 of Let's Play Chainmail Solo. Until we meet again, happy delving, and fight on!